Hello and a very warm welcome to this channel of book reviews. Today we are taking book reviews of two books. Both are written by world-renowned philosopher Noam Chomsky. One is Consequences of Capitalism, Manufacturing Discontent and Resistance, which Noam Chomsky wrote with Merv Waterstone. And the other book which we will talk about is Power Systems. Both the books are renowned bestsellers and we'll combine their book reviews together. Main theme of both the books is that there are billions of people who are living in conditions which are surrounded by endless wars, widespread environmental catastrophes, unprecedented levels of global wealth and income inequalities, repressive and authoritarian regimes. These are the conditions in which a majority of world populace is living today. Aim of the books is to focus on organization of society into social, political, economic and cultural themes which seemingly are not connected with each other and there seems no connect between them. However, these streams have deep and implicit connections through history, theory and practice of power systems. The essence of Consequences of Capitalism is that those who are advantaged by the status quo are continually at work to make it sure and make us understand that the way things are is the way things should be. This is what legitimizes the hegemony of mainstream discourse and status quo. The hegemonic foundations of capitalist realism, this is a term which Noam Chomsky has coined for this book, that capitalism realism and its foundations are firmly anchored in our mind as the prevalent and collective common sense which binds us to think that there is no other way of organizing society or politics and business except the post-industrial capitalism. As a result, although formal slavery has been abolished, but a de facto mental slavery has replaced it. The authors then explore the ways in which this political economy is embedded in history. Colonialism and imperialism in the past and surge for finding cheap labor across the world today. These are the manifestations of the mental slavery and how the mental slavery has been inculcated by using the two tools of colonialism and then the post-Second World War colonialism, which is more mental in nature rather than actual physical hold of countries. Also, the contemporary imperialism in the name of liberating other countries from governments and ideologies which are antagonist to Western ideas, especially US ideals, is a tool through which the neoliberalism spreads new colonialism. The example of Pakistan is quoted where lack of real democracy is considered good, but in an adjacent news item one sees or reads that America is promoting democracy. This double thing, or the ability to have two contradictory ideas in mind and believe both of them are true, is what is inculcated in the Western minds. And the double thing or the double standard does make them oblivious to the actual reality in which the world is living today. Example of the state terrorism in Kashmir and Israel and US hiring terrorist countries like Israel and Taiwan to commit the most brutal atrocities which go unnoticed on media, which go unnoticed in societies, which go unnoticed in the so-called liberal societies is given as prime example. Relation between capitalist critical economy and environment are also explored. Short-term focus on profitability at the expense of environment in terms of its degradation, decay, global warming are fully discussed. Global warming are the products of superpowers' economic activities through capitalism. The examples of China and India are highlighted. China, which is considered as an emerging economy, and it is an emerging economy, but Chomsky highlights that China is a huge assembly plant where actual manufacturing is quite less as compared to assembling the products. India, where a couple of million people have become very wealthy, but the average consumption of food has actually declined during the last 20 years, is also considered and propagated as a new world economic force. There is quite a bit of politics and quite a bit of Western interest embedded in these projections. The global crisis caused by neoliberals is mainly manifesting as commodification of public services and an all-out assault on the ability of labor to organize. There are massive deregulations of every segment of economy, and the absolute faith in market-driven principles to adjudicate all elements of social, political, cultural, and economic life mean that free market economy is the main ideology from which all the other streams like politics, economics, and cultural values are being driven. This results in staggering level of wealth accumulation by a few and mind-boggling income inequalities, erosion of almost all forms of social safety nets, loss of the common in virtually all sectors. Common becomes the invisible, the powerless individual who has no voice and no say. How the elite respond to the consequences of capitalism is a question raised by Noam Chomsky in these works. The elite led a plethora of social movements like socio-political and economic justice, environmental activism, human rights promotion, criminal justice reforms, poverty alleviation, and many more to appear on the surface through media, but keep these movements not only separate from each other, but also by pitching them against each other. This is important to understand because the common man, which Chomsky says as the common, is oblivious to the interconnectivity of these discourses and is unaware how these discourses help and promote the spread of capitalism at the expense of the common person. Now, this is done in the guise of nationalism, patriotism, or nativism. Through these tools, blame is shifted on the most vulnerable lot like immigrants, non-dominant communities, the old, the young, and the differently abled, and the deviants from the norms of the elites. Now we will briefly discuss the consequences of this unleashed capitalism and the mental slavery of capitalism in the current geopolitical developments. Recently, we have seen that there are many countries who have been targeted by US. Iran is a prime example. Turkey is a prime example. Pakistan is a prime example. Now the question arises why these countries are targeted and why they are punished, why they are put in grey lists, why embargoes are imposed on them, why they are singled out as sources of deviance and terrorism, whereas the Western world itself indulges in state terrorism and takes no notice of atrocities committed in areas like Syria, Palestine, and Kashmir. These countries are considered potentially antagonists to the US ideology, especially Iran and Turkey. And Pakistan, for the last 3.5 years, refused to obey the orders of Pentagon and US. So they are considered as prime targets for regime change and are therefore painted as deviant countries across the world. The sophisticated propaganda of freedom of expression and the so-called liberalism in which it is couched is actually again reserved for the elites. If these suppressed individuals or social groups or even countries try to express their freedom of expression, that is considered as being disruptive, deviant, and against the norms because it is against the interest of status quo and main discourse. Therefore, capitalism is not only an economic system, but a system which crafts the economic, the political, the social, the so-called democratic discourse in a world which is full of inequalities, not in terms of income alone, but in terms of atrocities committed on the weak, in terms of blatant violations of human rights and blatant violations of UN resolutions by the powerful. So, in a nutshell, it is the powerful and the elite which the capitalism protects, not the other way around. The other half, it's not the half actually, it is what people say the other 99% are just helpless buyers and consumers who spend their money to finance and build the financial empire of the elite. This is how capitalism works both implicitly and explicitly to maintain the status quo and ensure that the dominant discourse is maintained.